You have developed a very unique niche as a therapist, and I
Mhm.
would love for you to share with our community more about that niche and how it developed for you,
Mhm.
Mackenzie.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work a lot with obsessive compulsive disorder. It's my favorite thing to work with, and it's my most frequent thing that I see in my office. So a couple of years ago, when I was finishing up my master's degree, I was in my internship, and I was trying to gain enough clients to be able to finish up my degree and move forward with my licensure. And I had a unique opportunity to kind of step into a need that my old practice was seeing. They were seeing an influx of people reaching out for help with obsessive compulsive disorder. And at that point in time, I didn't know a lot about it. And honestly, it wasn't one of the main focuses in my master's program. There weren't any classes completely dedicated to obsessive compulsive disorder. We maybe had 1 week of teaching on that subject, but I think there were so many inquiries that came in, and they were looking for a clinician to step into that and to kind of figure out what is going on here and how can we help. And so I went on a pretty deep dive intellectually into, where does obsessive compulsive disorder come from? What does it look like? How is it different from anxiety and all of the anxiety disorders? How do you treat it? And what I saw in my office was a lot of people who had been misdiagnosed with anxiety, and had tried to go through treatment for anxiety, but were not seeing the results that they wanted. And then, of course, as we kind of went through their symptom list and cross-referenced that with obsessive compulsive disorder in the DSM, it was very obvious that that was actually what they were experiencing. And then we started to actually treat them for obsessive compulsive disorder. And I had the privilege of seeing people's lives completely change with that. And so it's been a really formative process for me and has shaped kind of the pathway of my career for right now.
Wow, that is so exciting. We know in this field that when you can mention something and you can
Yeah.
name it, you can start to manage it.
Yes.
And certainly a couple of years ago, when you started building your niche and your
Mhm.
expertise, as a country, we were in a pandemic, and
Yeah.
I don't think we'll ever forget it as long as we live. And
Mhm.
do you believe there's a correlation between the pandemic and the COVID virus that we all experienced a couple of years ago at a heightened, um, diagnosed time, and the correlation then between how that was impacting our children with more anxiety and more obsessive compulsive tendencies? Do you
Mhm.
see that correlation in your practice?
Mhm. I do. I absolutely do. A lot of people that are in my office right now date their symptoms back to COVID times, kind of emerging during COVID times. And I think this is an instance of another one of those both ands. I think that, yes, COVID definitely brought out people's problems, people's anxieties, people's worries, people's obsessions and compulsions. However, I do think that there's also the fact that those people that are experiencing OCD and maybe experienced the emergence of those symptoms during COVID, that they also had a predisposition for that. Maybe they had family history with mental health disorders and maybe even obsessive compulsive disorder itself in their family. I think that's a huge, huge factor. But I do think that the complexity of COVID-19 times really, really just kind of was a breeding ground for anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorders. And so I think that kind of a lot of what we see right now, we can date back to, the fear that people experienced in the unknown during that time. It was so hard to understand for all of us, but especially for our children. They didn't have any sort of language for what a pandemic was, or why there was a death count on the news that they were seeing all the time, why their friends weren't allowed to come over anymore, why they couldn't go to school. I think that those were really, really high level issues that kids were having to figure out at such a young age, something you and I didn't have to do as a child. We didn't have to figure that out. And I think that, that lack of language for what was going on and the lack of knowledge to be able to process that issue then led to a lot of worry and anxiety and obsessions and fear of the future, fear of the unknown. And I think that that's kind of what we're still dealing with today.
Mm. It makes so much sense, doesn't it? I mean, we were all hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
Some don't need to be buying hand sanitizer, but we were carrying it. They were carrying it in backpacks. And I'm just so glad that we're not in that place anymore, but you're here and other helping professionals are here to help our children now regain a sense of peace and regain a sense of felt safety in their bodies and in their environments every day.